Pack your bags and check yourself into a facility or find a way to pay your own bills. That's what my son said to me on a Tuesday morning. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked upstairs, pulled my old duffel bag from the closet, and started folding my shirts. When I came back down with that bag over my shoulder, he was standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed, ready for a fight. But there was no fight, because just then, a black pickup truck pulled up in front of the house, the kind with a custom chrome grille and a contractor's logo on the side. And my son watched with his mouth open as my old friend climbed out, the man I hadn't seen in 11 years, the man who had built a company worth more than anything my son would ever own. He looked at me, looked at the truck, and for the first time in months, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand what led to that morning. You need to understand who I was before my son turned me into someone he was ashamed of. My name is Thomas Riley. I'm 67 years old. For 31 years, I ran a hardware store in Clover Falls, Indiana. Nothing glamorous. Nuts, bolts, paint, lumber, everything a working man needs. I opened that store when I was 36 years old with $12,000 I'd saved working construction and a loan I paid back over 9 years. My wife Carol ran the counter while I handled the inventory and the supplier calls. We built that place together, shelf by shelf, customer by customer. Half the houses in Clover Falls have a porch or a roof or a bathroom tile that came through my store. My son Derek grew up in that store. He did his homework on the counter after school. He learned how to count back change before he learned long division. When he was 14, I paid him a real wage to help on weekends. Not charity money, real work pay, because I believed a boy should know the value of what he earns. I was proud of him. I was proud of everything we'd built. Carol got sick 6 years ago. Breast cancer, stage 3. We caught it late. I won't go into the details of what those 2 years looked like, because even now it's hard to put into words. I'll just tell you this. I sold my delivery truck to pay for her second round of treatment. I refinanced the store. I spent more nights in hospital chairs than in my own bed. And through all of it, I never once thought about whether it was worth it, because it was Carol. It was always worth it. She passed 4 years ago, a Thursday in November, with my hand in hers. Derek came to the funeral. His wife Vanessa came too, dressed like she was attending a company luncheon. They stayed 2 nights at a hotel in town, not at the house where Derek grew up, the house where his bedroom still had the old baseball pennants on the wall. They said the hotel was more comfortable. I nodded and didn't say anything. After Carol died, I kept the store going because the store was the only thing I knew how to do. But something had gone out of me. I made mistakes I wouldn't have made before. I overstocked the wrong items, let a supplier contract lapse, missed a property tax deadline, and paid a penalty I shouldn't have had to pay. The store was still making money, but not the way it used to. I was 63 years old, running everything alone, and for the first time in my life, I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Derek called me about 18 months after Carol died. He'd moved to Columbus by then, working in commercial real estate. He and Vanessa had bought a 4-bedroom house in a development called Briarwood Estates, the kind of neighborhood where all the mailboxes match, and there's a homeowners association that sends letters if your lawn gets too long. "Dad," he said, "you shouldn't be running that store by yourself. You're working yourself into the ground. Come live with us. We have the space. You can rest. Spend time with the grandkids." He had 2 children, a boy named Connor, who was 9, and a girl named Ellie, who was 7. I hadn't seen them in almost a year because the drive to Columbus was 4 hours, and I never felt I could leave the store for a full weekend. I told him I'd think about it. He called 3 more times over the next month, each call a little more insistent. "Dad, it doesn't make sense. You're alone in that house. The store is draining you. Sell it. Come here. Let us take care of you." That last phrase landed in me like a warm light. Let us take care of you. I'd been taking care of things by myself for so long. I thought maybe this was what family was supposed to be. I thought maybe Derek had grown into the son I'd raised him to be. I sold the store. I want to be clear about how that went, because it matters for what comes later. I hired a business appraiser, a woman named Patricia, who had an office above a sandwich shop on Main Street. She looked at the books, the inventory, the property, the customer base, and told me the store was worth between $210,000 and $240,000. I told Derek this. He said he knew a commercial buyer in Columbus who was looking to acquire small hardware operations, that he could handle the deal and save me the broker's commission. I'll take care of it, Dad. Trust me. I trusted him. The sale closed at $175,000. Derek said the market had softened, that the buyer had pushed back, that this was the best he could do. I had no reason not to believe my son. So I signed the papers and I got $175,000 for the store I'd spent 31 years building. I gave Derek $50,000 right away. For the renovations you mentioned, I said, and for the inconvenience of having me there. He hugged me and told me I didn't have to do that. But he took it. I kept $125,000 in a savings account at First Midwest Bank. My emergency fund, I called it. My safety net. I arrived at Briarwood Estates on a Saturday in October with my Dodge Ram packed full of what I'd kept from the Clover Falls house. I had to leave most of the furniture behind because there was no room. Derek and Vanessa had already furnished every square foot of that 4-bedroom house in a style that Vanessa called transitional modern, which meant everything was either gray or beige, and nothing had a sharp corner. Carol's armchair, the green one she read in every evening, didn't fit the aesthetic. I left it behind. The room they gave me was technically a bedroom. It had a closet and a window. The window faced the side of the neighbor's garage, about 8 feet away. The room itself was just big enough for the twin bed they'd set up, a dresser that was too small for all my clothes, and a nightstand where I put the photo of Carol and me at Niagara Falls from our 20th anniversary trip. The room smelled like fresh paint and something else underneath it, something damp, like the drywall hadn't dried completely after a plumbing fix. I didn't say anything. I was grateful to be there. The first month was awkward but not cruel. Vanessa showed me where things were in the kitchen, explained which drawer the good silverware was in and which one was for everyday use, and told me that she kept the house on a schedule. Laundry on Mondays and Thursdays, deep cleaning on Fridays, grocery delivery on Wednesdays. She was not unkind. She was simply precise, the way a person is precise when they are tolerating something they didn't fully agree to. I tried to help. I cooked dinner twice that first week. The first time I made Carol's pot roast, which had always been a Sunday staple when Derek was growing up. He ate 2 plates and told me it was exactly like he remembered. Vanessa ate half a plate and said she'd been trying to cut back on red meat. The second time I made spaghetti with garlic bread and the kids ate everything on their plates and asked for more. I felt useful that night. I felt like I was contributing something real. But Vanessa started managing the kitchen the following week. She explained that she had a meal plan for the family, that they were working on portion control, that it was easier if she handled dinners. "You don't have to cook, Thomas. You should rest." She said it warmly, but what she meant was, stop being in my kitchen. I found other ways to help. I fixed the dripping faucet in the hall bathroom that had apparently been dripping for 6 months. I rehung a cabinet door in the mudroom that was misaligned. I noticed the weather stripping on the back door was worn and replaced it with materials I'd picked up at the hardware store across town, paying out of my own pocket. Derek walked past me while I was doing it, glanced down, and said, "You didn't have to do that, Dad. Not thank you. Not I appreciate it. Just you didn't have to." Like I'd overstepped. Vanessa's first real comment about money came in the second month. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. Derek reading something on his phone, the kids still upstairs, and she set a piece of paper in front of me, without preamble. "I put together the monthly household costs," she said. "I just want everyone to be on the same page." The paper showed utilities, mortgage contribution, food, streaming services, internet. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was a number, $1,600. "That's a fair contribution for your share," she said. "Given everything." I didn't argue. I had the money. I wrote them a check that same afternoon, and I kept writing checks, every month, $1,600, drawn from my savings account. Derek's Social Security comment came in month 3. We were watching the news together, one of the rare evenings he wasn't working late or taking client calls, and there was a segment about retirement benefits. "Are you collecting Social Security, Dad?" he asked, not looking away from the TV. I told him yes. I'd started collecting at 62, a little over $1,100 a month after deductions. He nodded. "You should be putting that toward the household." I told him I was already contributing $1,600 a month from savings. He said, "Right, but you should use the Social Security for that, instead of drawing down your savings." And somehow, without me ever agreeing to it explicitly, by the following month, I was handing over my Social Security check and still contributing to the household costs. The first time Vanessa said something that made me feel physically sick was on a Thursday evening in month 4. I was in my room reading when I heard her voice from the kitchen, sharp and unhurried, talking to Derek. He's home all day. He moves things around. I found my good mixing bowl in the wrong cabinet again. And honestly, Derek, the way he just sits in the living room when I'm trying to work from home, it's distracting. I can feel him there. I can hear him breathing. She paused. "I need my space. This is my house." I set my book down and sat very still. Derek said something too low for me to hear. Vanessa said, "I know he's your father, but we didn't think this through." I got up quietly, put on my jacket, and went for a walk. It was 40 degrees outside. I walked to a gas station 3 blocks away, bought a cup of coffee from the machine by the register, and sat on the curb in the parking lot drinking it. The man behind the counter watched me from inside, but didn't come out. I must have looked strange, an old man sitting on a curb in the cold, but I needed to be somewhere that wasn't that house. When I came back, they were watching television together. Nobody mentioned where I'd been. After that, I started going out every day. Derek had said the library was a nice place, only 5 minutes drive. I started going every weekday, arriving when it opened at 9 and staying until 2 or 3. It had large windows and long wooden tables and a row of armchairs near the periodical section where old men read the newspaper without anyone bothering them. I became one of those old men. I read everything. I read the local paper, the national papers, magazines about history and woodworking and travel. I read novels I'd never had time for when I was running the store. The librarian's name was Joyce. She was 61, small, with short white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and a habit of humming faintly while she reshelved books. She noticed me on my second day. "You're new," she said. Not rudely, just observantly. I told her I'd just moved to Columbus. She asked from where. I said Clover Falls. She said she'd never been, but had heard it was a nice town. I said it was. That was the full extent of our first conversation. But Joyce had a way of checking in without being intrusive. She'd stop at my table to set a magazine down. "Thought you might like this one." A woodworking journal one day, a history of the Rust Belt another. She was right both times. After 3 weeks, I found myself looking for her when I walked in, just to say good morning. She was always there. She was always the same. Steady, quiet, present. One afternoon I was sitting in my usual armchair, and she brought me a cup of coffee from the staff room. "I made too much," she said, which I knew wasn't true. I thanked her. She sat in the chair across from me, which she'd never done before, and she said, "You seem like you're carrying something heavy." Just like that, plainly, not prying, just naming what she saw. I told her more than I meant to. I told her about the store, about Carol, about the room that smelled like damp drywall, about Vanessa's voice coming through the wall. I told her about eating my meals at the kitchen counter because the dining table felt like it belonged to someone else's family. I told her about the Sunday mornings when Derek took Vanessa and the kids to his in-laws' house for brunch, and I stayed behind in a house that suddenly felt like a museum exhibit of a life I wasn't part of. Joyce listened to all of it without saying much. When I finished, she said, "I've known a lot of people who came into this library because it was the only place that felt safe. You're not the first, Thomas." Then she stood up, collected her coffee cup, and went back to work. But something had shifted. I felt less alone in a way I hadn't felt since Carol. The grandchildren were the part that surprised me most, in both directions. Connor, the older one, had a remote detachment that I eventually understood he learned from watching his parents. He was polite to me in a careful, managed way, like a kid who'd been coached. But Ellie was different. She used to sit next to me on the couch in the early evenings and ask me questions. Real questions, not kid questions. Grandpa, did you ever build something that fell down? What was the hardest job you ever did? I told her about the time I helped a neighbor re-roof his barn after a storm took half of it. 3 days in July heat, and she listened like it was the most important story she'd ever heard. Then one evening, Vanessa came home from a work dinner early. She found Ellie and me sitting together looking at photos on my phone, old photos from the store, from the construction jobs I'd done before I opened it. Vanessa stood in the doorway and said pleasantly, "Ellie, honey, you should be getting ready for bed." Ellie said she wanted to hear one more story. Vanessa said, "Grandpa's tired." She wasn't asking. Ellie climbed off the couch and said goodnight to me without looking at her mother, and I could see by the way she held her shoulders that she was upset but knew better than to show it. After that, Ellie still came to sit with me sometimes, but she always had one ear toward the hallway. She started leaving before Vanessa got home. One afternoon, she left a folded piece of paper under my bedroom door. It was a drawing of a hardware store with a sign out front that said Grandpa's. I put it behind Carol's photo on the nightstand. The real breaking point came on a Friday evening in month 7. Derek had been quiet all week, the particular kind of quiet that builds toward something. I had learned to recognize it. He and Vanessa had been having long, low conversations after the kids went to bed, and when I passed their bedroom door at night, I could hear the murmur of her voice and the shorter, flatter murmur of his, and I knew they were talking about me. That Friday, Derek came home early. He found me in the kitchen making a sandwich. He set his briefcase down and said, "Can we talk, Dad?" His voice had the same quality it had when he told me about Carol. Like he'd rehearsed it. I put my sandwich down. I sat at the table. I said, "Go ahead." He stood with his back against the counter, not sitting, which I noticed. When a man doesn't sit down for a hard conversation, it means he's planning to be brief and doesn't want to get comfortable in what he's saying. "Dad, this isn't working," he said. "I love you, but this arrangement isn't sustainable." He said the word sustainable like it was a technical term from one of his real estate reports. Vanessa's under a lot of stress. Her work situation is difficult right now. She needs the house to be a certain way, and you're here all day, and it's... He stopped. Tried again. "It's creating tension." I said, "I'm creating tension." He didn't correct me. "You sold your store," he said. "You have savings. There are really nice independent living communities, Dad. Places specifically designed for people your age. They have activities, meals, people to talk to. You wouldn't be isolated." He'd looked it up. I could tell by how he was phrasing it, the language of a brochure. "There's one about 20 minutes from here, called Meadowbrook." I drove past it. "It looks clean and well-maintained. You could get a one-bedroom apartment. Use your savings. You'd have your own space." I looked at my son. I looked at the man my son had become. I thought about the night I drove 40 miles in a snowstorm to get to the emergency room when he broke his collarbone sledding at age 11. I thought about the afternoon I sat in a folding chair in a high school auditorium for 3 hours waiting for a 10-minute awards ceremony because he'd won a math competition and I didn't want him to look out at an empty seat. I thought about the envelope I'd given him on his wedding day with a check for $8,000. Every dollar of which I'd saved specifically for that moment. "You want me to go to a senior living facility," I said. "It's not a nursing home, Dad. It's independent." "Derek," I said, just his name, not loud, not angry. He stopped. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "All right." I pushed back from the table, picked up my sandwich, and went to my room. He called through the door a few minutes later. "Dad, we should finish talking about this." I told him I was tired and we could talk tomorrow. He said okay and went away. I sat on the edge of the twin bed for a long time. I held Carol's photo and I talked to her the way I'd been doing since she died. Not out loud, just in my head. I said, "Can you believe this is where we ended up?" And the thing is, I knew she'd have an answer. She'd have said something practical and clear the way she always did. She'd have said, "Thomas, you know what you need to do. Stop waiting for permission." I didn't sleep much that night. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started thinking clearly. I had $125,000 in a savings account, minus what I'd been contributing to the household over 7 months. I'd given Derek $50,000 before I even moved in. I'd been paying $1,600 a month from savings, plus handing over my $1,100 Social Security every month, which meant I'd paid out roughly $19,000 since arriving. My actual bank balance was around $56,000. Not a fortune, but enough to start over somewhere, enough to be on my own terms. And I thought about the phone call I'd received 2 weeks earlier that I hadn't told anyone about. His name was Roy Hutchins. We'd been friends since I was 24 years old, working the same construction crew in Fort Wayne. Roy was the kind of man who could fix anything with whatever was at hand, who knew how buildings thought, how wood and metal and concrete settled into each other over time. He'd moved to Tennessee 12 years ago to start a contracting and renovation company. We'd kept in touch for a while, and then lost touch the way people do. 2 weeks ago, out of nowhere, he'd called me. He'd heard through a mutual friend that Carol had passed and that I'd sold the store. He'd said he was sorry about Carol. He'd said he'd been thinking about me. He'd said, "If you ever need anything, Thomas, I mean that, you know where I am." I hadn't told Derek about that call. I don't know why. Maybe I'd known even then that I might need it. I went downstairs at 6 the next morning, before anyone else was up. I found Derek's laptop on the kitchen table, not to look at anything private, just because it reminded me that this was a space I had no real claim to. I made coffee with exactly the amount of grounds that Vanessa had marked on the container with a small strip of tape. I drank it standing at the counter because the chairs felt like they required a kind of permission I didn't have anymore. When Derek came downstairs, I was still standing there. He looked at me with an expression that was trying to be sorry but was mostly just hopeful. He wanted this to be easy. He wanted me to say, "I looked into Meadowbrook, let's set up a tour." He wanted to close this cleanly so he could go back to his life. Instead I said, "I'll be out of your house by the end of the week." He blinked. "Dad, I didn't mean this week. We can take our time and find." "I know you didn't mean this week," I said. "I did." He opened his mouth. I held up a hand, not to silence him, just to let him know I wasn't finished. "I want to say one thing, and I want you to hear it," I said. "Not to argue, just because you're my son and you deserve the truth from me." He nodded. "I gave you everything I had. I gave you your education, your start. I gave you money for this house, and I gave you $50,000 from my store when I moved in. I gave you 7 months of contributions that emptied a significant portion of my savings. I did all of that because I love you and because I thought that's what family does. But somewhere between the house in Clover Falls and this kitchen, you decided that love is a transaction, and I can't fix that for you. I can only refuse to keep paying." He didn't say anything. I set my coffee cup in the sink and went back upstairs. I called Roy that afternoon while Derek was at work and Vanessa was in her home office with the door closed. Roy picked up on the second ring. When I told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thomas, do you remember when the Kellerman job went sideways and we had to re-roof that whole addition in 2 days? And you stayed the second night even though you didn't have to?" I said I remembered. He said, "I never forgot that. You stayed because it needed doing and because I needed help, and that's who you are. Now it's my turn." He told me he had a house, a real house, a 4-bedroom farmhouse on 12 acres outside of Nashville that he'd bought and renovated himself, where he lived alone since his divorce. He said I could have the whole east wing to myself, my own bathroom, a workshop he'd built in the back that he never used anymore because his knees had started giving him trouble. He said, "I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you the same thing you gave me, someone to share the weight." I told him I needed a few days to settle things. He said, "Take a week." He said, "And Thomas, bring your tools. I've got a project list that's been sitting undone for 2 years." I didn't tell Derek any of this. I spent 3 days quietly packing, not frantically, not out of anger, but methodically the way I packed up the store when the sale closed. Carol's photo first. The drawing Ellie had left under my door. My tools, which I'd kept in a box in the garage. My documents, my bank information, my Medicare card, my pension papers, the clothes, the books Joyce had recommended. By Thursday evening, my duffel bag and 2 boxes held everything I was taking. Thursday night at dinner, I told Ellie I was going on a trip. She looked at me with those sharp 7-year-old eyes. "Are you coming back?" she asked. Vanessa said, "Of course Grandpa's coming back, sweetheart." I looked at Ellie, and I didn't lie to her. I said, "I'm going somewhere, I'm going to be happy, and I'll write you letters, real ones, with stamps." She climbed out of her chair and hugged me around the middle, very suddenly and very hard, the kind of hug that knows it's a goodbye hug. I held her for a moment. Connor watched from his chair and then went back to his phone. Friday morning, Roy pulled into the driveway at 8 o'clock exactly in his black pickup with the chrome grille and the Hutchins construction logo on the door. I heard the engine and came downstairs with my duffel bag. Derek was in the kitchen. He'd known I was leaving today. He looked at the bag and then at my face. "Dad, you don't have to go like this. We can figure something out." His voice had a quality it hadn't had before, something thinner than his usual certainty. "Who's out there?" he asked when he heard the truck door close. I said, "An old friend." I walked past him to the front door. Roy was coming up the front walk, bigger than I remembered, gray at the temples now, but the same straightforward walk, the walk of a man who knows what he came to do. When he saw me, he said, "Let me get those boxes." He went past me into the hallway, nodded politely to Derek, picked up both boxes like they weighed nothing, and carried them back to the truck. Derek followed me to the door. "Dad, please." And for a moment, I heard the 11-year-old with the broken collarbone, the 14-year-old counting change at the store counter, the young man crying in the auditorium parking lot when his team lost the state finals. I heard the boy he used to be inside the man he'd become. And it broke my heart, the way a thing can break your heart even when you know you're doing the right thing. I turned to face him. "I love you," I said. "I have always loved you, but loving you doesn't mean letting you treat me as a problem to be solved. When you figure out the difference, we can talk." I put my hand on his shoulder for a moment. Then I picked up my duffel bag, walked down the front steps, and got into Roy's truck. Roy didn't say anything for the first few miles. The Nashville drive was 6 hours. We stopped for breakfast at a diner outside of Cincinnati, where Roy ordered eggs and coffee, and I ordered the same, and we sat across from each other, and it felt the way it used to feel on a job site when the morning was cool and the work was clear and there was nothing complicated between us. "You doing all right?" he asked. "I'll let you know when I stop shaking," I said. He laughed. And that laugh was exactly the same as it had been 43 years ago, and something in me settled. The farmhouse was everything he'd said. It sat at the end of a gravel drive off a county road, surrounded by old oaks and a back pasture that ran down to a creek. The east wing had its own entrance, a bedroom twice the size of what I'd had in Briarwood Estates, a sitting room with a wood stove, and a bathroom with a deep tub. Roy had set fresh towels out. There was a coffee maker on the counter and a note that said, "Grocery run tomorrow. Tell me what you eat." The workshop in the back had a full set of tools, a workbench under a long window that faced the pasture, and enough projects to keep 2 men busy for a year. I stood in the doorway that first afternoon looking at it and felt something come back into my chest that I hadn't realized had left. I didn't hear from Derek for almost 3 weeks. When he finally called, I let it ring. He called again the next day, and the day after. Roy would hand me the phone when it buzzed and raise his eyebrows, not to push me, just to let me know it was there. On the 4th week, I answered. Derek sounded different on the phone. Not smaller exactly, but less armored. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once. He said Vanessa had apologized too, which surprised me more than anything else, he said. He said Ellie had started crying at dinner one night for no apparent reason, and when they asked her what was wrong, she said she missed her grandpa. He said Connor had asked if I was coming back, which was the first time Connor had asked about me voluntarily in 7 months. I listened. When he was done, I said, "I accept your apology, Derek. I mean that. But I need you to know something." He said, "Go ahead." I said, "I understand now that I made it too easy for you to treat me that way. I should have said something sooner. I kept quiet because I was afraid of the conflict, and that's on me as much as it's on you. But I won't do that again. Not with you, not with anyone." He said he understood. He asked if he could visit. I said yes, but not yet. I said, give me a few months to be a person again, then come down and bring the kids. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, okay, Dad, okay. What I didn't know when I made that call, what I found out 2 weeks later by pure accident, had to do with the store. Roy and I had been going through the workshop, sorting tools, discussing a renovation project on a neighbor's fence, when he mentioned offhand that he'd heard of Clover Falls Hardware. I said that was my store. He got a look on his face I couldn't read. He said, Thomas, what did you sell it for? I told him $175. He set down the wrench he was holding. He said, I know a broker in Indianapolis who handles exactly that kind of acquisition. Thomas, a store with that footprint, in a town with that demographics profile, with 31 years of customer loyalty, it should have cleared $240, easy, maybe $260. I sat down on the workbench stool. Roy got out his phone. He called the broker right then, put him on speaker, described the store. The broker said, if the books were clean and the location was what you're describing, $250 minimum, I'd have fought for $260. He asked who handled the sale. I said my son had arranged it with a buyer he knew. Roy and the broker exchanged a look I could see even through a phone call. The broker said, that kind of spread between valuation and sale price, with a related party as intermediary, that's worth having a real estate attorney look at. I didn't sleep well that night. I called a real estate attorney in Indianapolis the following week. I explained the situation. She asked a number of questions, requested the sale documents, and 2 weeks later called me back. She said the buyer my son had found was a limited liability company. She said the managing member of that company was a name I didn't recognize, a man named Gerald Fortner. She said Gerald Fortner had a professional relationship with a commercial brokerage. She said that brokerage's website listed my son as a licensed agent with their Columbus office. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that call. I don't want to tell you that my son was corrupt. I don't know with certainty what happened, and my attorney reminded me that without more documentation, it was difficult to establish what exactly the arrangement had been. What I know is that my store sold for $65,000 less than it was worth, that the buyer had a relationship with my son's employer, and that my son received my $50,000 gift the same month the sale closed. I know those things. What they add up to, I'll let you decide. What I did with that information was this. I called Derek and told him what I'd found. I didn't accuse him. I laid out the facts the same way Carol used to lay out facts, when one of us had done something that needed to be addressed, calmly and without performance. I said, I need you to tell me the truth about the sale. There was a long silence. Then he said, Dad, the market was soft. I said, Derek, stop. Tell me the truth. Another silence. Then a sound that I can only describe as a man discovering the weight of something he's been carrying without admitting he was carrying it. He said he'd made a finder's fee on the sale. He said it was standard practice. He said he didn't think it would affect the price. He said he was sorry. I told him that sorry was a starting point but not a destination. I told him that we would work out between us, over time, what if anything needed to be made right. I told him that I was not going to use attorneys and courts to damage what was left of our relationship, but that I was also not going to pretend that what he did was nothing. He said, I know, Dad. I know. He cried then, quietly, the kind of crying a grown man does when he realizes he has failed a test he didn't know he was taking. I told him we would talk more when he came to visit. I told him to bring Ellie. That visit happened 6 weeks ago. He came down on a Saturday with both kids and without Vanessa, which I thought was wise. Roy made himself scarce for the afternoon, which I thought was gracious. Derek and I sat on the porch in the late October sun, and we talked for 3 hours, real talking. Not the managed conversation we'd had in Briarwood Estates, but the uncomfortable kind that costs you something. I told him about the night his mother died. I told him I'd never told him the full version. How she'd held my hand and made me promise that I wouldn't spend my last years being afraid, that I'd find people who saw me fully, not just as a function or an obligation. I'd broken that promise for 7 months in his house. I was keeping it now. He told me things too. He told me about the pressure he felt, The financial pressure of the mortgage, and Vanessa's business expenses, and the kids' schools, and the keeping up that never ends in a neighborhood like Briarwood Estates. He wasn't excusing what he'd done. He was explaining the current that had swept him somewhere he didn't mean to go. I understood the current. I didn't excuse the choice, but I understood the current. Connor spent most of the afternoon in the workshop with Roy, who taught him how to use a hand plane on a piece of scrap oak. Ellie stayed close to me. She sat on the porch step and leaned against my leg the way small children lean against you when they're comfortable and safe. She told me about school, about a reading contest she'd won, about a friend who'd been mean and then apologized. I listened to everything. At the end of the afternoon, she asked me if I was going to come back to Columbus. I said probably not to live, but that I'd visit. She said, "Can I come here?" I said, "Yes." Any time her parents would allow it. When they left, Derek hugged me at the truck. It was a real hug, not a performative one. He held on for a moment. I patted his back the way I had when he was small and frightened. Old instincts don't leave you. I've been here at Roy's place for almost 4 months now. My mornings start with coffee on the porch, watching the creek catch the early light. Roy and I have a standing agreement. No talking before the second cup. After that, we plan the day's work. We're building a covered walkway between the house and the workshop. Cedar posts, metal roof, stone floor, a project that's going to take the better part of winter, and that I'm genuinely enjoying the way I haven't enjoyed a project since the last renovation I did on the store. I found a library in the nearest town, 11 miles down the county road. I go twice a week. I've been writing down the story of Carol and me, just for the family, just so the grandchildren will know who she was. Ellie already asked if she can read it when it's done. There's a man at the library named Howard who is 81 and comes every Tuesday to read the newspaper and complain about the coffee. He and I have started having lunch at the sandwich shop next door. He was an electrician for 40 years. We talk about the kinds of jobs no one does properly anymore. He's one of the best conversations I've had in years. I have a monthly check from Social Security, my own account, my own money, that I spend on exactly what I choose. Roy won't let me pay rent, so I've started buying the groceries and handling whatever project materials we need, which feels like a fair trade and maintains my dignity better than charity would. My son calls every Sunday now. We're not where we were before all of this happened. I don't know if we'll ever get back to where I thought we were, which may mean we were never quite where I thought. But we're building something smaller and more honest. And honest is worth more than I used to give it credit for. If someone asked me right now whether I'm happy, I would have to think about what the word means. I'm not the man I was when Carol was alive. I'm not the man who opened that hardware store at 36 with $12,000 and a loan and a wife who believed in every square foot of it. I am older, and I am quieter, and there are mornings when I wake up, and the grief of the last 4 years sits on my chest until the coffee kicks in. But I'm free. I'm in a place where I was invited and wanted, not tolerated. I work with my hands every day. I sleep in a room with a window that faces a pasture instead of a neighbor's garage. Someone in this house is glad I'm here, not for what I contribute financially, not for what they expect to inherit, but because I'm good company and I know how to work and I make the coffee strong. It turns out that's enough. It turns out that after 67 years, enough is the best word I know. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've ever sat in a kitchen that didn't feel like yours and measured how much space you were allowed to take up, then you know what I'm talking about. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story in the comments, because the silence of people in our position is part of the problem. We go quiet to keep the peace, and the peace was never ours to keep. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for me, for them. Because sometimes the most important thing a person can hear is that someone else has stood in that exact place and walked out of it, standing upright. Subscribe to Ember Vengeance for more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.